Well, I tried. I tried to warn people. I saw the writing on the wall, and I decided to give my message to my viewers. Yet, many viewers rejected it. Many viewers ridiculed me, made fun of me, told me I didn't know what I was talking about a couple of months ago when I said, hey guys, we're in the midst of a gaming crash. The gaming industry is burning down to the ground right in front of our eyes. Now, yes, it is a mostly Western related issue right now, but there are instances of it happening in the East. It's just not as prevalent in the East. And people just completely rejected that message. You know who else people rejected with their bold message? Jesus. Now, I'm not saying I am Jesus. I'm not saying I'm metal Jesus. But what I am saying is sometimes people don't like to hear the truth because the truth scares them. And the truth is something that kind of damages their image of what they have of something, of the video game industry being so successful, being so great, people with visions of getting into game development and wanting to work for game studios and stuff like that. And I'm sitting back looking at the bigger picture and I'm like, go to trade school. All right? Go to trade school. Learn how to be a plumber. Learn how to be an electrician. Those are things that will always exist. You're always going to have electronics. You're always going to have plumbing. The gaming industry, as it stands now, is burning to the ground. There are now websites dedicated to just putting up whenever another studio layoff has happened. And I just happen to have that website pulled up right now. You could see here that this is for consecutive different years of issues within the video game industry, stemming back to 2022. Now let's do a little zoom in here. Let's do a little zoom in here so we can see some of the names, because obviously a lot of this is spawned by WB San Diego, Monolith Studios, Player First Games, massive layoffs. Massive layoffs at WB Studio. Wonder Woman, a game that had a very large budget, canceled. Just completely vanishing from the face of the earth. A restructuring is coming. WB looking to sell off properties and stuff like that. Monolith, Condemned, Fear, great games that have just been tossed by the wayside. And looking over simply just 2025, seeing how many people are being affected. Crytek, High Rise Studio, Iron Galaxy, BioWare, Ubisoft, multiple divisions of Ubisoft. And people look at this. People look at this and think, oh, no, everything's fine. No, everything's good. The industry is in a very healthy state right now. Look at this console. This console's selling really well at razor thin profit margins because software isn't selling very well. Many games aren't hitting their metrics. Many games aren't hitting their destined fortunes that these companies have within them. And it all goes back to what? It all goes back to a myriad of things. But the main thing is the people at the top. And we're going to talk about all of the different facets of this because I have a lot of things to say. That essentially was just an intro. That's what we're getting into with this video. That was just the introduction to set the landscape for things going on, for reminding you of things like Star Wars Outlaws, for things like Concord, for things like Payday 3, massive games that failed completely. Dragon Age, they just announced that it's going to PlayStation Plus because nobody's buying it. But where do these what is the problem here? The problem starts for me with the higher ups. The higher ups at these companies are morons. And I've said this a million times, but I'm going to say it again. These people saw what was happening during COVID. They saw the system sales. They saw the software sales. They saw the renewed interest in the video game industry and literally thought to themselves, hey, this is sustainable. This is the future. As time goes on, people are going to buy more games. This is just the baseline. Now it's only up from here. So what did they do? They hired people, they expanded studios. Anyone with a brain, a functioning brain in their head would look at what happened. Look at the fact that people were stuck at home, had no other options. You had no other options. And would think to themselves, hey, this isn't going to last. This isn't something that is going to be sustainable. This isn't necessarily something that we should be banking our future on. Did anyone listen? Did anyone have that thought? No. And now you're seeing a rubber band effect. You stretch that rubber band out during COVID without realizing that the rubber band is going to break. And when that rubber band breaks, you're back to square one. So these higher ups at these companies that are so disconnected from what people actually want, all they care about is money. Now, inherently, that is just human nature. I know there's philanthropists and stuff out there. RGT wants his bags. RGT wants his money. But I'm also realistic about how to get said money. There are ways to maximize your profits and revenue and make good decisions while doing it. And what the video game industry doesn't understand is they're trend chasing trends from 5+ years ago. That's why you see this immersion or explosion, I should say, of these live service games. That what's happening now? They're dropping like flies because there's been so many failures. For every Fortnite, for every Helldivers 2, there's a Concord. There's a Lawbreakers. There's all the games that Ubisoft and EA made. There's a Knockout Ball, Multiverses, all this crap, all this live service slop that is from a time frame, from a mentality standpoint of a bygone era. People are tired of things like these games. And really, I think Helldivers' success has to kind of, lean onto the fact that this was a game that originally was a sequel to the original Helldivers that Sony didn't really have any involvement in. It wasn't until Helldivers 2 was already in development that Sony kind of got their fingers into it. So really to call it a Sony success is a bit of a stretch, but at least they saw the vision. At least they saw what was happening with this. So we have this situation with the higher ups and all these people, making these piss poor decisions, and it starts to extend into the roots of these video game studios and the roots of these problems with the video games that are being made. Because somewhere along the way, we got it into our mindset that every game needs to be this big, high budget production. And for whatever reason, we have to try and push technological limits of things and implement things into games that realistically, most gamers aren't going to notice. Most gamers aren't going to pay attention to the minute, fine details of something. But for some reason, we've made our budgets so big for these games that it's not realistic. It is not realistic to sell 10 to 15 million units of a game at $70 that looks pretty mediocre, but you invested all this money into it. I don't understand how we got to this point. Because if anything, let's call a spade here. If anything, game development has gotten leagues easier. Leagues easier. Game development used to be a very strict club to get into. Game development, you had to be one of those computer nerds who just knew how to program stuff. And that's why people like John Romero kind of became like a face of an industry at one point in time, because he didn't look like your prototypical guy who sat in a basement with like glasses and, you know, a little molester mustache and stuff like that. He looked like a cool guy. So people gravitated towards that. It was very hard to get into games. But now with all these tools, with all these resources available to you, it's easier than ever to make video games. Yet we're still trying to chase that dragon of diminishing returns, that dragon of, oh, you know what? We could have someone voice this, but if we get a Hollywood person to voice it, you know, that would be better. And then, you know, they're the Hollywood people. We have this obsession with Hollywood people. What do you think that does? That drives up the budget of these games. It makes these games more expensive. It's wasting money when you don't need to do that. Most people are not going to buy a game strictly based on the fact that an actor that they might like is in the game. Because we've become so concerned with games to the point of where we've forgotten if the game is fun. We've forgotten if the game is enjoyable to play. We're so preoccupied with, oh man, I hope it has ray tracing and 8K graphics, and I hope there's a star-studded cast with a deep narrative story that's been told time and time again, that you can take any cliche movie from the 90s and pretty much implement the characters that they've made for this video game and put them into that, and it would be like a one-to-one replication, because there are no new creative ideas in Hollywood. They are corrupt in terms of morality. They are corrupt in terms of coming up with new ideas. But no, these companies don't see it that way. They don't see it that way. And don't think I'm done. We're just getting started here. Because like I said, it is a root system. And how does a root work? At the top, you have the plant. That's kind of the CEO. You know, that's the finished product of the games. But the roots are what have created what is at the top. The roots are what creates the product that you see, the product that you play. You have to look at the people making these games. The people making these games seem to be very different than our last crop. And I don't think that's necessarily bad. It's good to have personal influences. It's good to have experiences in your life that maybe other people haven't experienced. I have lived a very strange life. My experiences definitely waver from the average person's experience, but I feel like that kind of gives me a different viewpoint of the world, that everyone does have a story to tell. And I believe that everyone should be able to tell their story. However, there is a time and a place to tell that story. You want to make a small budget indie game? You want to fund a game with your own money? Go right ahead. That's the beauty. That's the beauty of game development being so much more accessible nowadays. That's why you see one person make a completely successful game, or teams of 10, you know, grinding away with passion because they care about the industry. They're not trying to get into an industry to be a part of the club. They are the club. They're not getting into the industry to tell their story. They're getting into the industry to make a fun game. You want to make a smaller budget game that tells a story? That's fine. But when we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars and you're trying to inject your identity politics, your religious standpoints, your political standpoint, or whatever it is into a game, you have to understand that there are people that are going to disagree with you. They're not going to resonate with your message. And when we're talking about these huge, big budget games, I mean, the proof is there. You know, there are certain things that if it was a smaller budget game, if it was a game that, it wasn't costing, all this money to make and manufacture and stuff like that, the reaction would be different. But when you're just trying to weird things up just to weird them up, and then you're surprised, Why don't people like this? And it's like, well, they probably don't know where you're coming from. They probably don't understand. They probably didn't expect it to be in the game that they're playing. But we're not done yet. No, because there's another problem, folks. And it's a problem I've alluded to several times, and I will continue to allude to it. This toxic positivity bullshit. My God in heaven, the virtue signaling, toxic positivity bullshit. We literally learned that Concord failed. And one of the reasons why was because of toxic positivity, because nobody questioned anything. Everyone just went along with things because it could be seen as hurtful. Disagreeing with someone, especially when we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, but strip away the money. Disagreeing with someone is not disrespectful. It's not rude. It's how the world works. Not everyone is going to think exactly like you. Not everyone is going to see a situation exactly how you see it. And all because that person does not see a situation or a thing the same way as you does not make that person a bad person. It gives you a different perspective. Just like you want to tell your story. You want your perspective to get out there, but you're not willing to accept other people's perspectives. And you see it time and time again with this hive-like mentality, toxic positivity. Everything is great. Everything is awesome until you're unemployed, until your studio is shut down. And then what? Would you rather have someone came along and said, hey, I don't think that's a good idea. But the problem is it doesn't extend to just the game development itself. It extends to this industry itself, because every time there are massive layoffs, you see the same fucking people. Oh, it makes it so hard to talk about video games. Oh, it makes it so hard to love this industry when hundreds of people are getting laid off. It probably doesn't help that the same people that are saying these things still do exactly what they do. They're still going to cover games because it's their money. They can have sympathy, but not with their money, not with their paying their rent. But it extends to this toxic positivity thing, because when was the last time you saw a preview for a larger game that had negative stuff in it? When? I ask this question all the time. I asked John this question. And let's be real, John is kind of a middle of the road person. He's not taking a stand on anything whatsoever. And I said, every time a new game comes along, John's like, oh, the previews look really good. I'm like, John, when was the last time previews did not look good for a big game? And he couldn't tell me. And if there's someone that's going to know that, it's going to be John. It's this constant cycle of regurgitation to where the developers and the journalists and people covering games now have this, this mutual relationship. And it's not a business relationship. It turns into a friendship thing. And people don't understand that. People don't see that. But when you look at these events and you look at the people that are going to these events, it's always the same people. Now, why is that? Because they're at the top of their class in terms of journalism and in terms of their interpretation of video games and reviews of video games? Or is it because it's mutually beneficial for their feelings? Because you say nice things about my game, and I'll say nice things about you, and yada, yada, yada. We're all kumbaya. We're all just friends in this area, because negativity, being critical of something, is now deemed to be a bad thing. And yes, there are bad faith actors out there. Completely. It goes into that whole culture war thing. Woke versus anti-woke. This is woke. This is anti-woke. You're a wokey. You're a grifter right wing. Shut the fuck. God. It's so annoying. Just look at a situation for what it is instead of blanket statementing everything, because it just looks foolish on both sides. And once again, that's a whole nother subsect of gaming to where they both feed off each other. One can't exist without the other. They all have Twitter check marks. They all have social media. They're all making money off their tweets that you make go viral because, yay, this person's anti-woke, or yay, this person is woke. It's a grift on both sides. It's a grift. And grift isn't necessarily a negative word. It's just what it is. It makes money for these people on both sides of the fence. They can't exist without each other. But then this ends up getting into the video game side of things. It gets into the industry. And now we have this culture war going on while the industry is burning down to the ground, and everyone's standing around like, what the hell? How did this happen? How did we get to this point? What do you mean? What do you mean? Look at the writing on the wall. Overinflated budgets, overinflated studios, studio leaders who don't lead, who try to chase trends, companies who have this toxic positivity thing where you can't critique anything and you dare not question anything, or you're seen as a bad person, a work culture that is not conducive to creating fun video games, identity politics, religious stuff, real world politics, everything. We got to put this all in a game. Every game has to have this. Every game has to be this big thing. And you know, I just sit back thinking one thing. I was right. I saw the writing on the wall. I understood that this is where we were heading. And let me tell you, folks, we are still in the infancy. We are still in the ground stages. Just look at this year. What's Sony releasing this year? What are first-party Sony games for 2025? What's Xbox doing this year? I just released Avowed. I actually finished Avowed last night. Really good combat. I had fun with the game. What happened to Fable? Fable was a big 2025 game. Oh, well, that's a 2026 game now. So what's happening this year? Another quiet year from Sony and Microsoft. But one company seems to be doing all right. That Eastern company. Little Nintendo. The little engine that could. Maybe they understood the assignment. Because they're not going to have these $100, $200, $300 million budgets of stuff. No. Because that's not how they roll. And maybe that was the smartest decision this whole time. Because whether you like the games or not, and there was a lot of games in 2024 I was not a fan of from Nintendo. Or they just didn't. I shouldn't say that. I should say they didn't appeal to me. They still released a ton of games. And this year's probably going to be even crazier with a new system. A boring industry with disconnected from reality people is what we're left with. And it's a shame. And you know what the biggest thing for me is that there's a whole generation of people that don't understand how good it was. They don't understand how creative games were, how genres were created in the 90s and 2000s. There was so much competition. Everyone was trying to do better than everyone. All of these companies were taking risks. Sometimes these risks didn't pay off, but it was okay because you had other projects going along to supplement those risks. A risk didn't mean your studio was done. A risk didn't mean that your studio was going to close. A risk didn't mean that your company was going to no longer exist and you would be unemployed trying to seek work. It just meant that you tried something different. And now we're in the era you can't take a risk. You can't take a risk because that risk will lead to a studio closure. And it's a big plant that starts at the top and it trickles down. And it's not going to get any better. It's not going to get any better anytime soon. It has to crash more in order for there to be a change. And I'm just going to sit back and enjoy the ride like I always do. Like I always do. This video, holy shit. This is a long video. This was all over the place. And I probably contradicted myself at some point in it. But this was all no script. This is nothing, bro. This is just me talking, me from the heart. I don't know how I'm going to edit this. I'll probably edit it very lightly, but give me your thoughts. Give me your feedback. You know, are you finally convinced? Do you understand what I'm trying to tell you about the gaming industry? Do you understand finally? Or did you always understand? Or are you still oblivious to it? And if so, I mean, that's cool too. You can lead a horse to water. You can't make him drink. But you can stab that horse and have some delicious horse meat. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hit subscribe if you're new. Yeah, and I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.